As a former scientist, I do believe Dr. Douglas, or whatever his name is, needs to have some size 10 boots shoved up his. In the country of South Korea, after having been given the most ridiculous order in the year 2000, chemicals would somehow end up in the Han River. Now, humans dump things all the time, but this was like a lot of chemicals, and a lot of them were mixed as well. As time would pass, it would become clear that something was in the river that did not seem to be naturally occurring. As the creature made its way up onto land, it would begin picking up random people as a snack for later, which prompted the government to become highly involved with what was going on. The issue was, there seemed to be some sort of virus associated with the creature, but is there really? And how far would a group of bureaucrats go to protect their own reputations? Well, I think we all know the answer to that. So in today's episode, let's discuss the monster from the host, where it came from, why a fish fell off its body later on, or maybe fell off its body, and why you can't believe everything that you hear, because normally there's other reasons for things happening more than just what you're being told. We kick off our story, August 8th, 2000. Horrible Doctor Extraordinaire is telling Mr. Kim to pour formaldehyde down the sink. He says they are covered with dust, and that means they're dirty. Now, scientists do absolutely have quirks like this, but the key is to tell them to suck a railroad spike when you're being told that goes against something that's usually the standard operating procedure, or SOP. Because that's on you, usually not on them. Mr. Kim protests, but eventually relents, pouring an absolute ton of this stuff down the drain and directly into the Han River, because apparently Dr. Strangelove thinks it'll get diluted. 2 years later, in the same river, a pair of fishermen are hanging out when one spots a really weird looking fish in the water. Showing his friend, he doesn't know what it is either, and really just calls it a mutation before losing his grip and releasing it back in the water. They remark about how many tails it had, and then we flash forward to 2006. As a man is about to do a flip, he sees something dark in the water. Nobody else sees it, and then he jumps, and no thanks, that's literally my nightmare fuel. We now move on to our main man, Gangdu Park. Running the snack shack, well, sort of, he's just kind of sleeping on the job. He runs it with his old man, cooking squids, stealing squid tentacles, you know, everything that really comes with running a snack shack. He's also got a daughter named Han Seo, and you're gonna have to just bear with me on the pronunciations. It happens. Gangdu seems to not really be the most attentive father, sending his brother to Parents' Day, who also apparently showed up a little buzzed. Heading inside the shack, they're watching Han Seo's aunt, Namju, participate in the Olympics for bow shooting. At the last second, she pulls her shot and takes the bronze, which that totally sucks. Gangdu then gets pulled away to go out to Mat 4 to give them the new squid, as he stole one of the tentacles, which apparently are pretty good. Never had squid tentacles myself, just calamari. Wait a minute, that is squid. I've had squid tentacles. Going out there, the people aren't really too interested in eating, spotting something that's underneath the bridge. Trying to get a good look at it, they think it must be mechanical at first. That is until it unravels and then falls into the water. People begin thinking that it's some sort of river dolphin, but after watching that thing just, hang out underneath a bridge with a prehensile tail, it's like, bro, what? So they start throwing some beer at it to get it to react, which it then does. So as it goes away, it really didn't go away. The group notices that the thing is charging at them from the side, and this kicks off just a plethora of combat. At first, the creature doesn't really appear to know what to make of humans, not really going after anything, but instead running at them and seeing what they do. Eventually though, it gets the idea and starts grabbing people up like popcorn shrimp, until eventually some others run for a trailer. Well, this was a bad idea because the other side is actually chained up. One American soldier who is stationed there then begins to run and help along with Gangdu. The creature breaks out and runs after another guy next to semi-trailers and then just straight up eats him. And this is all while Gangdu and soldier number 1 attempt to attack. I mean, bro, that's like when you're running, just tuck and roll underneath the trailer. I don't know. Well, this goes over about as well as attacking a creature several times your size, as it then turns on the soldier, pinning him down and destroying his arm in the process. Gangdu attempts to help, but just as the creature turns on him, when he smashes its tail with some concrete, this ends up splattering him with blood from the creature. Because of Namju's pulled shot, Hyun Seo is a little bummed, so she heads outside and she sees, oh, well, everything's going to absolute crap. Gangdu grabs her hand, but they fall as the creature gives chase. Getting back up, he grabs the wrong hand and pulls another girl with him, accidentally leaving his daughter behind. And as she looks on, the Mr. Monkey Fish, it ain't playing. He grabs her and then jumps into the water, appearing to keep her head above the waterline as Gangdu attempts to swim after it to no avail. It then throws up one other guy on the other side before grabbing him as well. Later on, everyone is being rounded up to evacuate, as that seems like the absolute move, with that thing still being in the water. By the way, just so you know, did you know this is a comedy? So as the mass mourning in the gym begins, everyone is feeling pretty down about the situation. As the family goes up to see Hyun Seo's picture, the uncle has now arrived and apparently is very upset at Gangdu for grabbing the wrong hand. As they continue to wail, pictures begin taken of them as the government officials show up and eats it as he walks. Like, there is comedy throughout, but overall, very depressing. Anyways, getting back up, he starts vaguely talking about if anyone had contact with the creature and to raise their hand. Nam-il asks what they aren't being told about this, which the government official says there should be a report on the TV, which he can't find. Gangdu says that he didn't touch it, but he did get blood on him, which prompts a massive freak out for the hazmat team as they bag and tag him to bring him to quarantine. The news report says say that the one soldier who lost his arm in the fight has now got a strange rash, and they assume it to be potentially a new virus related to SARS. Because of this, the river is locked down. Gangdu at this point has an itchy back, so he starts to think maybe he has the virus. The doctor returns to tell Gangdu do not eat anything, as he has a ton of tests to be run on tomorrow, and then he goes on to eat, honestly, I don't know what this is. But as he's eating, he gets a call from Hyun-seo. She found a phone and calls him to tell him that she's still alive, which prompts a need to actually leave the hospital or at minimum get help. Meanwhile, down at the river, a sterilization team is moving through under the bridge and finds money. Leaving his truck to grab it, he begins looking in the water, but the creature was above him the whole time. It attacks the team, dragging them to a horrible fate down in the sewer with Hyun-seo. It's a fairly deep chasm, and as such, nobody can really escape, including Hyun-seo, who is in the wall. She attempts to search people for their phones, but they're usually broken. The next day, Gangdu talks to a cop, but is talking just completely backwards. I have no idea why he can't explain this, but the cop just begins to think like he's crazy or something and ignores his pleas, despite his family actually stepping in and also trying to explain it. The cop assumes that he's in shock over losing his daughter and nothing more, decides to leave. That is some great detective work. This necessitates the leave to actually now leave the hospital, despite the lockdown that they are currently in, seeing as really nobody's going to help them. Leaving the hospital, Gangdu is spotted by his blonde hair as a nurse yells for him to stop. So they begin noping out of there as Hee-bong talks to someone on the phone when they are in the elevator. That must be a pretty good phone because I always lose signal. Heading to the parking garage, a black van then pulls up as they make their way out, but leave Namju behind momentarily before she finally decides to move faster than a slow walk and gets in the van. Making their escape, they're not at a junkyard being told the total for them to get out of this situation and for actually just getting a sewer map comes out to $11,400, which actually comes out to 14,946,769 won in today's money. Good Lord, pain. As the rest of the Park family stays in the van, they see that there's a news report on them as the nurse recounts her story of being jumped on by Gangdu and attacked so that he could escape, which that didn't happen as we've seen, but I mean, nobody would lie in the news, right? At this point, Hee-bong is given a van and a few force multipliers to hunt this thing down as they are headed to the sewers in an attempt to find Hyun-seo. Donning their disguises and heading into a checkpoint, they are wayed forward before a man in particular asks them to roll down their windows. He's actually pretty smart. Having them open the windows, he immediately recognizes them as the Park family. Basically, their giveaway was a truck runs on shifts, and they just so happen to show up randomly in between shifts. But he really doesn't care. Hee-bong then just kind of bribes them and they drive off. Hitting to the river, the search begins as they explore sewer after sewer the entire night to really no benefit as they can't seem to find her. Nam-il begins discussing the actual possibility of the virus existing as they have been with Gangdu all night and yet they have no symptoms. Nam-il now questions if Hyun-seo gave any information on what the sewer looked like so that they could narrow it down, which all she said was that it was a big sewer. As they discuss, they see movement. Getting ready, water spooks them as it falls on Namju. They fire into the roof, which then scares the other two that are in the sewer. So if you remember, it's actually the two at the very beginning of the movie. They're participating in something known as Seori, basically stealing food for a time and giving it back later. Breaking into the snack shack, they take the food but leave the money. Heading back outside, the brother attempts to explain Seori, but is interrupted by a giant prehensile tail and a creature running at them. As they take off, they're chased by it, which cuts to the Park family returning to the snack shack. As they warm up their ramen, I didn't get this at first, but as they eat, Hyun-seo materializes and then starts eating with them. But it turns out Gangdu just passed out from exhaustion because she's definitely still down there in the sewer. As she collects water, Monster Mash returns and drops off Si-jin and Si-ju, with Si-jin having met his end, but Si-ju's still alive. As the family gets ready to go, good lord, Nam-il literally points a barrel at Gangdu, and the father explains why Gangdu is different. Something about not getting enough protein as a child as he was running around, or at least the father was acting crazy and didn't feed his kid, but apparently he is smart, he just needs to sleep a lot. I don't know about that, but that is the official canonical explanation. He then scolds Nam-il and Namju for scolding Gangdu when he's the one who lost his kid, which yeah, I mean maybe they shouldn't be doing that. But they aren't really even listening as they're falling asleep during the whole thing. As he continues to talk, Gangdu wakes up and spots the creature. It is actually watching them through the window. Hee-bong now becomes a massive baller and takes a shot at it and appears to actually injure it as it runs and flips the shack over. Looking down on them, he lets out another shot, injuring it and shocking it enough to fall onto the ground and not move momentarily. The creature definitely isn't done yet though, as Nam-il fires another shot into it, waking it back up and sending it running for the bridge. They run out of lead to sling as soldiers then begin closing in on their position with the creature heading into the water. Hee-bong at this point elects for a final confrontation and grabs Gangdu's force multiplier as he apparently had one round left. Well, unfortunately not. He goes to pull the trigger and it doesn't do anything because Gangdu miscounted. Oof. Also imagine saying oof in 2022. So the creature then headbutts the dad, knocking him out. Using its tail, however, it's angry and then it flings him, ending Hee-bong and leaving him there before heading back into the water. Gangdu goes and moves the head around of his father, which is great for a possible spinal injury that probably may have been survivable. I'm not saying he would have survived, but if anybody has a spinal injury, don't touch their head. He then covers his face with a newspaper as the soldiers approach, but he's overwhelmed by grief and then heads back as he's trying to run away. Comedy, am I right? So the soldiers take him in and we get a news report, which is going to be pretty messed up later. The soldier who lost his arm has apparently expired by the virus, which prompts a freak out as this virus has now supposedly officially taken its first life. So the Korean government elects to use chemical compound known as Agent Yellow to neutralize the virus they literally just found. How interesting. This obviously freaks out the people there, as one man is coughing and then spits into the water, having everyone get splashed by a bus that is passing. So basically, everyone is worried at this point. It seems some time has passed, however, but probably not too much time, maybe like a day or so, as Nam-il is meeting up with Pil Sung-yim. Also, again, like I said, pronunciations, I'm not the best at it. So as they meet, apparently, he's there to help Nam-il, supposedly. Nam-il is there to trace Hanseo by using the phone company's ability to trace calls. Sung-yim talks about his credit card debt as Nam-il traces the call. Sung-yim also keeps asking about where Nam-ju is, which is obviously a little suspicious. As Sun-yin then heads into another room, it becomes apparent that they are after the reward for turning in the entire family. The group then gets ready as Nam-il finds Hanseo's location. Using a paperclip, he then shuts off the power and is able to make his escape, heading outside. As the cops arrive, he hangs over the ledge of a bridge, but evidently loses his grip and then falls pretty far, injuring himself, but rolling into the shadows to get away. Calling Nam-ju with no answer, he then sends her to the location before passing out. The next morning, Nam-ju wakes up on the bridge and continues the search. That night, she receives a text from Nam-il when she finally plugs in her phone and begins heading that way to find her. She calls Nam-il as the creature comes bounding towards her. She pulls her shot once more, like just shoot the arrow, good lord, and then is hit into a small area that the creature can't enter, which ends up saving her because she's actually knocked unconscious. Gang-do at this point is at a medical facility. They're about to perform some sort of operation. They anesthetize him, but it doesn't appear to work too well as they begin taking tissue samples. Another doctor comes in, affectionately known as American Doctor, who appears sympathetic to him, but really just doesn't care. After hearing about his daughter, he checks him for the disease, which is now suspected. They said that they need to check his brain as it must be in there. The American doctor goes on to explain that there was no virus actually found in the soldier who lost his arm or anyone that they did the autopsies on. So it has to be in the brain of the person. So that basically means that American soldier just totally got screwed. And really everybody else who got autopsies done, but they didn't need one. Basically, they are getting desperate to cover their ass over something they said existed, but now they're not too really sure if it's actually a thing. So obviously, checking the brain of someone is the best next step. This is literally like The Last of Us Part 1, you know, the good one, where they're like, oh, we need to take a brain tissue sample to figure out, you know, what's in her brain that helps with the spinal fluid and the fungus, and all they really needed to do was a spinal tap, which they wouldn't have to scoop out her brain. Anyways, Gang-do overhears this, and this makes him a loose end. As he tries to tell the doctor about this, they really don't seem that interested in helping him as they prep him for surgery, or it appears like a little bit of a lobotomy. As Hyunseo and Si-ju talk in the sewer about food, seeing as Si-ju is now somewhat of an orphan, he says he wants to live at the food stand as he really has no home. Also, I like how they show that his brother is basically just bodied right there, so I mean really he is on his own, but he seems to be adapting rather well to the situation. Hanseo says that she just wants cold beer. Using the clothes, they make a ladder to throw up and try to get out. However, this attracts the attention of the creature, who begins throwing up bones in the pit, along with a cold beer. Delicious. It then goes on to eat the next guy as they continue hiding before the creature finds them hiding in the wall. Meanwhile, back at the surgical camp, after the brain tissue was taken, he still seems to be okay. Actually, maybe even a little more focused. He jacks a nurse and then heads outside to find everyone just sort of hanging out. He's able to then steal an ambulance and make his escape to go get his daughter. Meanwhile, Nam-il wakes up under a bridge downtown and tries to pay the homeless man for the bottles and bag before getting smacked in the head. They then catch a ride, making Molotov cocktails along the way, and head to the bridge where the government plans on releasing Agent Yellow to take the creature out. Gang-do at this point has arrived at the correct sewer as Hyunseo and Si-ju aren't really looking too hot after their encounter with the creature. Hyunseo at this point decides the only way out is to use the creature as a base to climb out. Running and jumping on the creature, she grabs a makeshift rope but is grabbed by the prehensile tail. It lets her out as her and Si-ju then run for the hole in the wall but clearly don't make it in time. Gang-do now finds the pit along with all the bones. Climbing down, he finds Hyunseo's name tag and is not really jazzed about this. The creature, however, moves past him as Nam-ju goes to take the shot at it with Gang-do close behind. Apparently, a full-on protest is now happening over the Agent Yellow being deployed. Gang-do gives chase to the creature on the bridge as it makes its way towards the protests for some more snacking. The cops attempt to push everyone back as everyone voluntarily disperses, seeing that the creature has now arrived. The cop takes a shot at it, which prompts Gang-do to jump into the water. The Agent Yellow is now released as the creature makes its way there with everyone caught in a cloud getting blasted with it. The creature creature, being injured by the concoction, falls to the ground as Gangdu is able to pull his daughter out of the creature's mouth, who is clutching Si-ju. But after all of that, she's a straight goner. Comedy, am I right? Wait, I already said that. This is just depressing. As more Agent Yellow is then put on the creature, it continues to freak out and literally has fish fall off his body, which, okay then, either that or just threw it up. But with Hunseo gone, everyone is big sad as Gangdu is now super upset at the creature. As mentioned by the grandfather previously, any animal that takes out a human should be torn limb from limb, which I say, hell yeah, brother. Gangdu begins his final confrontation with the creature. Grabbing a metal pole like the one he used earlier, he begins smacking it, which allows for Nam-il to throw Molotovs at the creature, but he misses like every shot. Randomly then, the homeless man shows up with gasoline and pours it on the beast as it begins drinking it too, and you think that would hurt. Nam-il goes on to throw the last one, but drops it like a total Chad. But Nam-ju is there to take the shot with her bow, finally taking the shot, and then igniting the creature. As it burns, it tries to head to the water to extinguish itself, but it's stopped by Gangdu with the pole, stabbing it through the mouth. This results in the end of the creature as it falls and continues to burn. As it go back to Hyunseo's body, someone, could have done CPR. Maybe like an attempt at revival, right? But they just kind of pet her and good lord, okay. Gangdu then goes to check on Si-jo and is able to wake him up, asking who he is and why he was with Hyunseo. He hugs the kid and just then sort of adopts him, like a Giga Chad would. And those who were exposed to the Agent Yellow get back up, but are definitely bleeding from orifices, which, I'm gonna tell you, long term, that is not a good sign. That winter, Gangdu is now running the snack shack and watching for any more creatures that may come out of the water. Hearing something, it was really just his mind playing tricks on him as he decides nothing is there. Waking up Si-jo, he makes dinner as both share a meal together as a news report plays about the government messing up, like really bad, and there was actually no virus, and an inquiry is being launched into this misinformation. So great times. So they eat in a massively aesthetic snowfall scene, and there you go. All is well except for the grandfather and granddaughter getting wrecked by this creature, and probably everybody else too. So first things first, let's begin where all good stories begin, the start of this creature. The creature from the host is what you would call a conglomeration of a naturally occurring animal, or at least a mutation of a naturally occurring animal, because conglomeration isn't confirmed. Initially, this creature was actually inspired by something that was really found in the Han River. During a routine fishing trip, a carp with an S-shaped spine was discovered as it had a hump on its back. Now, this could be several things really, as far as to what's causing this, but I would go on a limb to say any water near a large human settlement with an industrial sector, probably not the type of water that you really want to be hanging out or fishing from. But then again, I live downstream on the Chattahoochee and it passes near Atlanta, so I tend to stay away from that water entirely because I don't want to mutate into a giant host fish monster. Anyhow, the fish has an S-shaped spine, and this massively influenced the design of this creature. But this creature to me looks like it has to be probably a carp in origin, at least initially based on the face and the beady eyes. And to add to this, the carp also tend to swim in schools when younger, which I'll explain in a few minutes. But just know, this to me is probably not a largemouth bass that's commonly found in the Han River, but instead is likely the predatory carp that is commonly also found in the same river. Okay, so to explain how this creature even came into being in the first place with the original organism nailed down, we have to take a look at its overall physiology and a major context clue in the movie itself to figure out what's kind of going on with this thing. Starting with the tail, this creature has a massive prehensile tail, as we have seen, and that can be used to grab onto creatures at will and take them with it. Now, this is a bit bizarre, seeing as the tail's functionality of this magnitude is just really not that apparent in fish. In fact, the standard swimming tail has been completely lost concerning this creature, despite all the tails on its back. For this to be possible, I believe the main organism, again, is a predatory carp, but something strange overall has happened with this creature concerning its genome, apart from how the rest of it looks, but we will get there soon enough. Heading up the tail, we see the lower side of the body has several limbs attached to it. On the ventral side of its body, vestigial limbs have sprouted, which do not appear to do much of anything apart from exist, hence the vestigial designation. On the dorsal side of the animal, we see strangely several carp fins that exit out of the area. Now the question is, why exactly? Well, there are two possibilities concerning this. The first is what we have all seen when the Agent Yellow is dropped onto the creature. A fish does appear to literally detach itself from the beast. Either that or it was thrown up, but it's not really shown which. This would possibly mean that the tails coming out the back of this beast are other fish if this is to fall off. And there could possibly be a reason for this. As you may or may not know, carp, when they are just starting out, typically stick in small schools. The reason is there's safety in numbers. However, as they age and grow, they will leave these schools and become more solitary. The fishermen just a few years prior actually had already seen this creature when it was much smaller, and yet it still had many tails, which may either hint at the creature being a conglomeration of these carp after having been exposed to these chemicals poured down the drain, or that these mutations were already inspired from virtually the time the creature ventured out into the water by itself. The second option is that this creature has literally existed as a singular organism the whole time, and if this is the case, the tails do still makes sense, based on their placement on the body being at the dorsal end towards the back of the body. Naturally occurring processes during the fish's formation would mean that this area would have cells attempting to build fins during its gestational period in the egg. As the creature remained exposed to these chemicals, seeing as a carp also lay their eggs, which they assume to be protected areas, and that's the side of rivers, where likely this was near the sewer drain. Ultimately, this would cause the carp to exhibit several fins being produced on the body, seeing as the genome would be altered, and from the drop, the body's mechanisms for controlling growth and dictating which limb should be where would be completely altered, leaving a fractured direction of body growth as no origin point for the limb could be established, and this would lead to many cells to create their own limb. This would indicate a breakdown of cellular communication at this critical point of formation, which is likely how we see the rest of this creature come to be. Moving further up the body, we get the same indications that this thing is just totally around the torso exists two functional legs, which have gone beyond what we would expect from a fish, as there is no longer fins, but a functional actual pair of limbs that can be used to run at a high rate of speed. Just before this exists a smaller set of arms that curl up, but also appear to be able to hold onto food in front of its mouth. And speaking of mouth, moving back up to the head, they got a real fun house going on in Hans River, don't they? Most of the head looks like a giant carp head with little black beady eyes and a slit for the gills around the back of the jaw. However, these gills seem to be capable of taking in oxygen from the surrounding environmental air and sustaining itself. That said, it would appear that this creature does need to remain wet for it to properly function, much like an amphibian would need to remain in a moist environment for their skin to properly take in oxygen from the air. So moist gills will facilitate the exchange of oxygen. Moving up to the mouth, there are several just completely whack things. First, the jaw is split down the middle with an internal jaw rounding at the top. The jaw hinges outward with two at the top and two at the bottom, with the middle and top teeth overhead. These can close around a human and drag them away, but it's very clear that this jaw is inspired by the way a carp mouth looks, as they use a similar method of hunting, literally just opening their rounded mouths and swallowing fish. And also something to know is that the carp do have teeth further back in their throat, which can be seen when Hansio is actually swallowed and holding on to one of the throat teeth. Internally, the mouth has a central esophageal opening and again likely teeth further back, which carp are known for, which is still pretty metal. Poor Han River also has a long tongue that's almost able to use as much as its prehensile tail, which is bizarre as fish's tongues are really not that useful in terms of really them doing anything with it, which begs the question, why do fish have tongues in the first place? Someone who's a marine biologist, sound off on that one. Alright, so getting a look at this creature, there are several things that just aren't right. I mean, apart from virtually everything about it. When we take a look at its genomes and how they operate, while the mutations can happen, typically it's of existing structures rather than the acquisition of brand new features. Now, depending on what you believe, evolution from fish into more complex creatures would indicate that really fish moving from fins to feet isn't completely impossible. However, it takes place over millions of years and has to provide them some sort of benefit so that they can pass on those genes. We still see this to this day. Fish can actually exit water and will attempt to stand on limbs, and because of this, hundreds of millions of years later, after some nerd exited the water, I now have to pay a mortgage. Thanks, bro. But the obvious benefit of this was, if the fish can move up onto land, it may be able to otherwise escape a predator that was chasing it, meaning that its survivability goes up. And this is what's so bizarre about this beast. Prior to the exposure of chemicals, it in no way would have had access to the limb pathway of its evolutionary tree, seeing as its parents only had fins. Not to mention, don't even get me started on the tail. So what happened exactly? Well, seeing as these traits can just mutate into existence in this way, because they most definitely mutate into existence through hundreds of perhaps thousands of generations, which we call evolution, they again had to come from somewhere, at least in this instance. And to this, I direct you back to the year 2000 when the two scientists were talking about the chemicals in the first place. It's pretty subtle, but just prior to being cut off, Mr. Kim mentions how this isn't just formaldehyde and that all these chemicals will run off into the Han River, which doucher extraordinaire didn't care about. What I believe actually happened here is there is some sort of gene editing going on, or at minimum experimentation. Something besides just formaldehyde was poured down the drain, and with it, genetic information or instructions. Now, would this actually survive in real life? Not likely. Not the best, but the information imprinting correctly onto the genetic coding of a fish, it just seems really tough. But I believe this is the most viable outlook on this creature for several reasons. The first being the beast became quadrupedal out of virtually nowhere. Its body still did attempt to make tail fins, but the prehensile tail is a massive giveaway that something else was happening, as the information would not just naturally mutate into the genetic coding of a carp. On top of this, the limbs having almost finger-like protrusions and then ended in fins means that this creature's body was using supplementary information from somewhere else to create literal arms. But other cells on Team Build-A-Fin were still present and continued to grow into a fin. So where does this extra DNA come from? Well, I would like to say just take your pick, honestly, but it's 100% definitely expressing within this creature. Personally, I would be inclined to believe it may actually have come from a rat, considering considering that they were in a lab and that would make the most sense. Rats are known to have prehensile tails and can hang off objects for a short while. They also are omnivorous, which means they eat both meat and vegetation, but I believe it's the behavior that is the biggest indicator for this creature. Rats are known to become more active in late summer and autumn timeframes as they begin to prepare for the upcoming winter when food may be more scarce. They will gather food and place it in their burrow so that they will have something to eat as the temperature shifts. This is exactly what the beast was doing. Snatching up humans, it's no surprise it became more active during the later summer, early autumn timeframe. It began to attack humans when it became large enough. But also, I want to point one thing out. Remember when Hyunseo was in the creature's burrow? There were rats just freely moving around. Rats distinguish one another by smells. It's possible that they were hanging around the beast's burrow, not because of just the extra food and location, but because the beast saw rats as something of kin and allowed them to stay due to their shared genetic language. The other reason behind it being related to a mammal in some form or fashion is its ability to exist on land. This creature, being one that curls up underneath bridges for rest or in its burrow, would indicate that it does have the ability to breathe air for way longer than what would be standard for something like a lungfish or any other type of weird fish that makes its way on land. Because of this, some influence from another land-based organism would be needed for this creature to survive in an environment above water. This, coupled with all the changes of his body that also appear land-based, would indicate that somehow the chemicals would have moved into the fish egg and have altered the creature from the point that it was just barely fertilized, imprinting early enough to have a major profound effect on the body. Then, as the creature aged, it likely still joined a school of fish, but considering it was on its own when seen by the fishermen, not 100% convinced the fish were attached to it, but again, it is still possible. It could have been like an anglerfish scenario where other fish attached to it and were somewhat absorbed by the body or held on. However, for this to work, the behavior of the unaffected fish would need to be changed, which just doesn't seem likely. And then what would be the purpose and where would this drive to do this come from? To me, likely this conglomeration is actually just one fish with DNA altered by the chemicals, and then it just threw up a fish when the Agent Yellow was dropped. Also, just pointing out, the virus never actually existed. Seeing as they couldn't find it anywhere within anyone, this would likely indicate that the soldier who lost his arm was really just responding to a form, or basically exhibiting a form of topical dermatitis, either due to being allergic to the spit of the creature, or possibly if somehow the water was tainted enough with chemicals and was dripped onto him, it caused an inflammation response. So basically he was taken out because of allergies, and that totally sucks.